Tiura Evans, and welcome to the Inside Source Executive Video Series. With me today is Ted Weyn. He's managing partner of HCMWorks. Ted, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here.
So you've always been a SIG champion, but you did take a break for a while from SIG, and now you've come back. Can you tell us a little bit about why you left, and have you seen any changes since you've rejoined SIG?
Yeah, well, a lot of changes, very exciting changes, obviously, at the current summit. Congratulations on a record attendance, so that in itself is something to be excited about. And I think for us, as we were evolving as an organization, young organization the first time we were with SIG, now a little more mature, I say to people, gray in looks, old in experience, young in company, we were able to better define our value proposition, and I think that gave us an opportunity to come back to SIG and I think add more value back to the organization and allow us to get more input into what we're doing and give more back out to some of the thought leadership we think we see in the market today.
Well, HCMWorks has changed a lot since you were with us last time. So why don't you tell us about some of the changes, and it's changed pretty dramatically.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the history of our organization has, and our background was originally in a lot of the temp labor, indirect services relative to temp labor. It's always been our vision that temp labor often represents 10%, 15% of a corporation's total indirect expenditures. And as we see maturity in the temp labor programs with the VMS providers, the MSP providers, we also see a real need in the market to expand those programs. So while those programs are very well designed, very well implemented, there's a real need in the market to how do I expand this horizontally? Matter of fact, one of our methodologies we now call V2H, vertical to horizontal, which is how do I create proof of concept in a certain vertical and then take it horizontally. So we really started to expand our services at our customers, which said, what other categories of indirect can we help you with?
Okay, so indirect, though, has been addressed for a while by a lot of procurement organizations. Is this talking about the more complex indirect categories?
Yeah, it's so.
Okay.
So it's, you know, it's one of those things where people often say indirect services, indirect procurement, and there's not always a right definition for it. And it's very much like when you say temp labor to an organization. They say, does that include my SOW work? Does that include consultants? What does that include? So I'd say for sure for us, it's definitely it's definitely indirect services, which tend to be more complex. So we are helping organizations now with everything from not only the temp labor, but SOW type of work, consultants, call centers, legal, accounting, and then we are starting to get into more of the goods side of it. We have a customer who has outsourced all their indirect to us, and we're managing their purchasing of pallets for their warehouses. So it is expanded much greatly over the temp labor thing, which was the original foothold into the market. But it is more of those complex services where it can't be cataloged and it's not a SKU. There's a lot of collaboration back and forth in the transactions, and companies are looking at how do I better manage that.
But don't you notice people say indirect procurement, and then they immediately act as if that's the easy categories? And I almost wish that indirect services were pulled out of that, because they're so much more complex. Don't you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We find that there is a sense of lag in the market because the devil's in the details, right? So as organizations begin to get into those complex services and they see not only the collaboration that's required to transact, but the lack of visibility that they have even into those categories today, they tend to start to back away from them, almost like, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit more than I might be biting off more than I can chew. So that's really what we think our value proposition is how do we help those organizations get past those fears, not make it so complex, and how do I get the visibility into them so you can attack them better, because there's a lot of opportunity in those categories.
So best practice with regard to this type of indirect. Can you share some best practices with us?
Yeah, what we really do encourage our customers is not to boil the ocean. You know, there's a lot of push to ERP type of an approach, and do we outsource all indirect, and do we take it all on at once? And there's so much emotion tied into indirect, which is very interesting dynamic to it. If I say to an organization, we're going to change you from BIC to PaperMate or from Dell to ThinkPads, IBM, you know, in 24 hours, the buyer's over it. They're okay. They made that change. When I say I'm going to change your consulting organization who's become a trusted advisor to you, or we're going to go from one big 5 consulting to another or something, or law firms, we're going to go from one law firm to the other, it pulls out all this emotion. Because so much of the productivity of an organization or these services is tied to that. And you know, the terms trusted advisor and thought leadership does have value in those relationships. So what we try to do is help organizations not say, how do we replace them? How do we not make it just a sourcing event with lowest cost winner? But how do we balance the productivity model along with the new pieces of it? So, so I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. So, but all right. So with the economy, though, you're talking about areas that typically are not. They're the untouchables.
Sacred cows.
The sacred cows. So has that changed with the economy? Is that why you're now talking about legal and you're talking about consulting in areas that we typically couldn't have addressed in the past?
Yeah, you know, our ability to approach those organizations typically goes by it is a true partnership. In other words, the organization has to value the service and that we provide. If it's a commodity-driven sort of thing and they just look at it as another sourcing event, that's not a right fit for us. If they recognize that this is sensitive, that takes change management capabilities, this takes the organization's adopting and making a sustainable model out of this, that's really the right fit for us. So that's a big part of what we try to help organizations through is how do I get past the sacred cow, legal, marketing, you know, the ones that are typically the untouchables. And what we often encourage organizations that don't have necessarily the executive mandate to get after it or the burning platform that is driving them to get after it. It's about getting visibility first, and that's really where we're encouraging organizations from what we say is the best practices is you can't manage what you don't know, right? We all know that. And so if I can take either a good system, technology, platform, P2P, or processes improvements that get me visibility into how I buy these things, that information can be provided to the executives, and then we can change behavior.
Okay, so with the economy, we're not hearing anyone that's got free reign to go start hiring. And so we're hearing more and more folks that are going to have to do more and increase productivity with temp labor. So let's talk about some of the dangers of using temp labor or not doing it well and not sourcing it well and managing it well.
Well, I think what you said there at the back end is really the key. Temp labor is an excellent way to manage productivity and manpower planning. If you don't manage it, though, it can become a runaway train. Not only from an expense standpoint, but also from a legal exposure standpoint. There's tons being written about. I mean, I'm getting overwhelmed with my Google alerts and what's coming out on misclassified employees. The IRS has staffed, what I understand, thousands of more agents just to pursue the misclassification of employees. So, you know, we see these companies who are getting knock on the door from the IRS and they're saying you have this population of employee and how are you managing them? How long have they been there? What's their tenure? Or do you manage them, don't them? And the IRS actually publishes a 20-point checklist that says, you know, if a person's an independent contractor, you know, they need to meet these criteria. So the important piece of it for organizations is really in how they manage it. So it's about compliance, it's about visibility, and it's about setting the right corporate policies, working with legal and risk that says, how do I manage these people? How do I ensure that we have right policies there? And then again, visibility. We talked about that earlier, but visibility is really important. How many contractors do I have on site? What has been their tenure? We talk about luxury versus necessity. Do I really need the person, or is this just a nice to have? And managing some of the demand management capabilities that we can do as well in that regard. So the temp labor, to answer your question, the temp labor is an extremely powerful and very well used productivity tool. But like anything else, if you don't manage it well and you don't have visibility into it, it can become something that's valuable, can now become a sore spot or a weakness in the organization.
So with people with temp labor, we've got the 20-point test from the IRS, and then state by state, they have their own variety of tests as well. Do you help people manage through that process on a global basis? We do. We have programs and processes that we try to put into place for our, you know, actually almost all of our clients. We've now done that. It becomes, we go into many organizations and unfortunately we find that there is no visibility. It is unwieldy, it's not being managed.
So we do put those mechanisms into place to help them centralize the process, centralize contracts, centralize the visibility of where those people are, and then even in some cases put together a third-party provider who can process all those individuals, who can say and run them through, which gives you a barrier of defense against legal exposures. People say, what's the guarantee and what's the silver bullet protection kind of thing? And there really is none, because it's just like anything. You can do all the right things from a tax preparation standpoint, still doesn't mean you may not be audited. And some of those things are then subject to interpretation. However, your demonstration of prudent activity will always mitigate the risk.
Good. So you started your own video series, I've noticed. It's very good, very well done.
Thank you.
What's been the biggest surprise or surprise interview you've had?
You know, to be honest with you, I don't know that there's been one surprise from one individual. What has been surprising was we went through a process of saying, let's ask these procurement professionals the same questions, expecting to get varying answers. And what we found was that we really didn't. So it was interesting in the sense that conceptually, there were variations and some people prioritized things differently. But what was interesting was we got a lot of the same information in terms of, you know, how do you manage indirect, right? You know, and the priorities really were very much the same. You have to get visibility in it. Don't try to boil the ocean. You know, get proof of concept, create the business case, then replicate. You know, I mean, all of those steps and everything were really very interesting. So I would say for me, the surprise was that the basic fundamentals were the same. That people saw it as indirect as a great opportunity. It's an untapped opportunity. Companies shy away from doing it because of some of the complexities you mentioned earlier. But most of all, it was really about you got to get after it. It's actually some part of the series is called Get It Done, which kind of evolved after the series because that's what they were saying. There's opportunity here. You have to be a little bold and you have to just get after it. And just grab a category and wrestle it to the ground and extract savings and watch some of the process efficiencies you get from it.
So I think what we need to start doing is having conversations that you don't manage just indirect spend. You manage indirect services, complex services spend. Don't you think?
Yes, no, for sure. And we wrestle with this because, because like I said earlier, the definition is different to every organization you talk to. So if you say indirect, then they, you know, in a manufacturing organization, they're talking about spare parts and, and lubricants and chemicals and pallets. And, you know, and some of those things are more of, you know, that direct type of a SKU or a catalog. I can go into the catalog, buy this pallet and get 10,000 of them and transaction's done. So yes, it is really our true niche and focus, I think, and the value is on those complex sides. You know, HCMWorks, Human Capital Management, that's HCM stands for. And because our vision always has been is that so much of the indirect services are human capital related. They're productivity that comes from external resources, right? So like the lawyer, external lawyers, accounting services, consulting services, even marketing. When you go outside to a marketing agency, you're getting creative, which is coming from people. They're not products. So that was always really kind of from the beginning, the HCM was human capital management, which is really when you put almost any services into it, it kind of covers that. So,
right,
yes.
I loved it when you spoke at our recent Boston roundtable. The second you were done, it was like everyone just glommed onto you, and they had 50,000 questions for you. So I want to thank you because you're such a compelling speaker and you really know your subject. But that was a lot of fun to see how everybody wanted that follow-on and yes, but, and will you sit with me at lunch and can we keep talking? So
yeah, well, I appreciate that, and it is fun. And I'm, you know, 25 years and been passionate about it ever since. And my partner as well is from the industry, and she's extremely passionate about it as well. But the reason all those questions come is because it's gray. It's very gray. We wrote a blog post about misclassification. And we said instead of the government hiring all these IRS agents to pursue people, why don't we just make the law clearer, more clear?
How about that?
Why don't we just make it clear for these companies to know what's right, what's wrong, and how to comply? Because one of the other byproducts out of this whole misclassification suits that are coming out, multi-millions of dollars, is ignorance is not an excuse. So,
but you know, so I'm a CPA. I haven't been in private practice for a long time now. But this was an issue way back then. And we still had the same 20-point test. And that time I was in California, and they had a 10 or a 12-point test. I mean, this is this is not new.
No, it's not.
And yet we still haven't cleaned it up after all these
It's an
years.
important thing for organizations to really make sure that they have their ducks in a row.
Well, Ted, thank you for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been fun.
So Ted Weyn with HCMWorks, and thank you for joining us for our video series. And please look up Ted, because this conversation is going to continue.
Great.
It's not over yet.
Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks.